there is a lot of diversity. You know, the one brush feminization is not happening in the whole region. So there is a lot of variability between the countries and within intra-country as well. So I would like to welcome my gender panelists and I would introduce them. Professor Sucharita Sen, JNU India, an ex-executive director whom you saw in the film of Sache Waters, who conducted a study on trends in gender participation in agriculture. Emma Karki from CEMET, who will talk about ground level learnings from the SRFSI project, the longest project in the portfolio. Bethany Cooper from the University of South Australia and a team member of the institution led by Lynn Craze, who will talk about measurement of women's empowerment. And Farah Kabir, Country Director ActionAid, whom you are seeing on it, I'm seeing on my screen, is a member of the program steering committee and will provide her reflections on the role of women in agriculture activities. So I had initially thought that we will go from the macro picture to the micro picture, but Farah, is it easy on your time if you talk about your reflections on the role of women in agriculture in Bangladesh from a development perspective for a few minutes?
Thank you, Kuhu. I'm happy to go as you feel fit, and I think this session will be also interactive, so one can come back later also, isn't it?
Yeah, right. So
yeah.
I would
Sorry.
So I will then ask Sucharita to give her reflections, highlights, challenges. Sucharita?
Yes, thanks, Kuhu. Thank you for sharing the thing with everybody, which actually summarizes the work quite well. So I'll take very little time and try and add on to that. Now, the work which we did was women's role in agriculture in EGP, and I think one of the highlight was that it brought the macro and the micro connections together, the micro in a less obvious way. And it took off with the backdrop of a general expectation of feminizing agriculture in developing countries in general and South Asia in particular. And it sought to develop a deeper understanding in this lower basin of a large river like Ganga, and a region that has a number of homogeneities in terms of, one of the homogeneities is that how its dependence on agriculture vis-a-vis its economy is concerned, and also some pluralities like socio-cultural pluralities. Now, EGP, what the study covered was EGP in its entirety, Bengal and Bihar in West Bengal, most of Bangladesh leaving aside the northwestern part, which is the part of the Brahmaputra basin, and the eastern part of Nepal. So it exhaustively used some of the, I would say, relatively underutilized, large-scale labor surveys by the respective government of the three countries. And it supplements it with a focused exploratory field survey. Now, in terms of findings and contributions, it finds diverse patterns in the socio-temporal trends within the region, with a clear defeminizing trend in India. These kind of studies were earlier there, but we did it specifically focusing on West Bengal and Bihar, and a feminizing trend in Nepal and Bangladesh. For the latter, that is Bangladesh, the trend is particularly sharp. Comparing, it starts off from a low base of women's participation in rural area and agriculture in particular, both in relative and absolute terms, and it catches up within the duration of the study, which was like 15 years, 20 years, depending on the country, catches up with India and betters it actually. In terms of the contribution, I would like to list 5 contributions. It gives me an opportunity to look at the study from a distance now that we've done it some time back. Number 1, interpretation of defeminization in India has to be understood in the context of the larger agrarian distress experienced by the country at large. No, there are, I mean, as it was said in the film, there are different kinds of explanation. But what the study found was the causes actually were rooted more in distress-driven factors rather than factors like prosperity-induced withdrawal, women's participation in education, etc. Second, empirically, it establishes that a male selective outmigration is not always associated with feminization in agriculture. In Nepal, it did, but Bihar, it did not. So Bihar is a case in point. Number three, conceptually, the work established that the women's work has to be seen in a nuanced way and probably a plural way. The same kind of finding can be interpreted from a large number of perspectives. And one of the things within this was that the extent of participation of women's work need not necessarily supply better quality of work. So in Bangladesh and Nepal, the percentage of paid work among women has reduced over a period of time and unpaid family work has increased. And the reverse is the case in India. Methodologically, the study demonstrated the utility of a mixed method, even in gender issues, which are primarily most of the gender studies are draw from qualitative interpretations. This had primarily quantitative with supplementary qualitative understanding. In terms of triangulation and complementarity, I think methodologically it demonstrates that in terms of gender issues. In terms of policy direction, it draws on the importance of women's work in a more inclusive way and the need to move forward, arriving at a common measure of work across countries that captures women's work more effectively. Like in the three countries, there are different kind of ways in which work is measured as such, and the degree of invisibility within that, those measures are different. And it made it a challenge for us to actually compare the three countries. We did some adjustments. Some we could do, some we could not. So I think this is one of the important things. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sucharita. And that was a learning which came to us when we spoke to the policymakers, and they said, well, where is feminization in India? It is defeminizing. So we delved deeper. So from here, the broader context, I would like to move into the ground level context, and I will request Emma Karki from CIMIT, who will talk about ground level learnings from the SRFSI project. Emma?
Yeah. So I think our work focuses or has a bit more narrow focus because we're looking at CASI users, and we've tried to ask household head pairs. So we asked husband and wife similar questions in terms of their experiences and evaluation of CASI use. So I'd like to highlight 4 key findings. One was regarding knowledge. So we find that there wasn't really a difference or an imbalance in knowledge regarding weeds in a ZT system. And both household heads had like a limited but a common understanding. Whereas there were differences in knowledge regarding the indirect benefits and in terms of perceived resource requirements. So when we look at the second layer, there were some differences in how men and women were evaluating or understood the system. In terms of time savings, I think there are 2 separate studies that we did under CERC where there were substantial time savings both by men and women, and it did not lead to any reallocation of tasks from men to women during the planting period. And women in particular explained that tasks such as land preparation, manual weeding, and meal preparation for laborers that required visiting the fields were tasks that have been more or less eliminated. But of course, it is also important to find that in places such as Bihar, where women were perhaps not doing these tasks to begin with, did not necessarily see this as a change. And they report that they're responsible in more post-harvest tasks. So there has been change in roles and responsibilities due to time savings, whereas we find that women are taking more managerial tasks. They're perhaps managing livestock with their extra time. but there is an overall reprioritization of extra time back to household tasks, and something that Sucharita said, that these are tasks that they were already performing and are largely unpaid and back in their household. But I think from Kuch Bihar, there's good learning about engagement in groups, where women have been provided an opportunity to learn new skills, and that has then resulted to perhaps opportunities in home-based income generating opportunities. We saw examples of mushroom cultivation and seed packaging, and these are things that are done at home, and they perhaps allow women to manage existing activities and perform these. But of course, I feel like we need to do more research on what it means in terms of the impact on their overall workload, as we find that these tasks are something that are done simultaneously, but are done on a daily basis. And then we look at financial savings and how men and women both experience that CASI use has really allowed them to meet basic needs, and there has been less conflict due to that and less stress due to that, and there has been an increase in overall well-being. And both households has associated that with a change in status within the community. But women actually highlight that this has also led to improved relations with their husbands, so perhaps more influence in decision making, and also increased respect from other family members. You know, there were mention of mother-in-law seeking their input in certain tasks and decisions. In terms of investments made from these additional financial savings, there were commonalities where both would indicate, so we would be comparing what the husband said versus what the wife said. There were commonalities in terms of construction, renovation, education, and just meeting household needs. But we also noted that there were differences in prioritization, where women would perhaps indicate saving for future, for their daughter's wedding, and the fact that toilet has been constructed and there's now water drinking facilities that make their lives easier. Whereas men would indicate that they're investing back in agricultural equipment. A lot of service providers would say that, well, this has now allowed me to purchase more and continue that as another income generating opportunities. And they also tended to focus more on the fact that that money was used as expenditure and less highlight of being able to save. So overall, I think we would say that CASI has been friendly towards women. But these changes are not inclusive, exclusively CASI, and they're happening outside. And a lot of these external drivers, such as labor shortage and male out migration, and also interest and project intervention that provides opportunities for men and women to be involved in community level discussions. Just sharing physical space and exchanging ideas is leading to some sort of challenging and changing conventional attitudes. But there is social criticism when these norms are challenged, and there is community engagement that is required to sort of tackle that. So yeah, I think those are some of our key findings, and we have conducted a quantitative study that looks at over 1,000 paired household interviews, and we're in the process of analyzing that. So we hope to share more on what we find. And like I said, these are based, we're coming up with 3 papers, 1 that has been published, 2 that's under preparation, and I'll be happy to answer more questions. Yeah, back to you, Kuhu.
Thanks a ton, Emma, and my apologies. I didn't clarify that we will take questions at the end of the panelists speaking, and we'll have time. So now I would invite Bethany Cooper from the University of South Australia and a team member of the institution's project. Welcome, Bethany.
Great. Thanks very much, Kuhu, and good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep. Great. Thank you. So the observations around measurement that I will talk briefly about this afternoon, as Kuhu said, stem from the institution's ASIA project that Lynn Cray spoke about on Friday. And we've already heard some really important observations around measurement in this session. So we also found that measuring women's empowerment is very challenging, given the strong limitations around the type of data that is collected and made available. So from a policy perspective, we know that national policies for women exist across India, Bangladesh, Nepal. However, the growing acknowledgement of gender rights has opened, although it's opened up some new employment opportunities for women, there are still large numbers of women that remain in low paid or unpaid positions. So at the ground level, there are still a lot of questions about empowerment of women. And so we've heard in this session today that women in agriculture is one of the key areas of concern. And this is largely because women's labour in some areas has become increasingly prominent, while the important thing to note is that their claim on assets like land are still very weak. So for example, in a recent review by the National Council of Applied Economic Research, the review found that women comprise over 42% of the agricultural labour force in India. However, they only owned less than 2% of the nation's farmland. Some of the household level data also has serious limitations, and this data can actually disguise important nuances. For instance, a household that is considered to be above the poverty line will often have women and children who are still below the poverty line. So even though governments claim to be promoting empowerment, in our project we found that data for tracing change is actually not readily available in many of the jurisdictions in the EGP. For example, we were able to get some insights from surveys undertaken by IFPRI in Bangladesh, but the systematic accumulation of empowerment data, it's just not evident. So we specifically looked at identifying the gaps in the agricultural sector with particular focus on India. We identify gaps such as production data being recorded at the household level with little or no discrimination between the contributions of men and women. Women's contribution to post-harvest storage and processing of grain also goes completely unmeasured. And women's contribution to high value crops is also not systematically measured. So in terms of moving forward in regards to the measurement of empowerment, we reviewed existing measurement scales and indices. And one of the more robust measures of women's empowerment is the Women's Empowerment Agricultural Index. So this index has been used across multiple regions, but as with many indices, there are limits to this index. So we also looked at identifying the limitations of the Women's Empowerment Agricultural Index through conducting a systematic literature review of its application across India, Bangladesh and Nepal. So subsequently in a paper, we discussed some alternative measurements approaches that could be used to overcome some of the limitations of the Women Empowerment Index, such as taking into account that dimensions of empowerment are not always additive and may actually crowd out each other. So in summary, our key messages are that if policymakers are serious about women's empowerment, it is important that they invest in measuring it. We recommend prioritising the administration of periodic time use surveys for women, men and children, both boys and girls. These types of surveys will help us get a better understanding of women's and girls' contributions to family welfare and help us understand how modern technologies like the mechanisation of agriculture affect different members of the household. So from our work, it's clear that empowerment of women is still clearly important, but its measurement needs attention. And we think there are opportunities to improve both how we measure empowerment and also how consistently these measurement exercises are undertaken.
Thank you, Bethany.
Thanks, Kuhu.
I think I'm blowing the time out. Next, I would request Farah Kabir, who's a program steering committee member, to reflect for a few minutes on the role of women in agriculture from a development perspective. Welcome, Farah.
Thank you, Kuhu. I was wondering how best to present this because the extensive pieces of work that we have done is all Bangladesh related. But listening to the presentations and that, it's very similar depending on where you are in South Asia, I think. And the gender gap, Sucharita has mentioned some of this, but I still feel that if I could draw attention to some of them as we see it, that it took a long time, first of all, to acknowledge women as farmers or as, as an actor in agriculture. It was always the hidden, invisible. So, for instance, in Bangladesh, a recent study revealed that 47+% of the country's nearly 57 million strong workforce is involved in farm work. And of this, 64% are women. This is just a study in 2020. Women comprise 43% of the agriculture labor force, crops, livestock, fish farming in most of the developing countries. And in Bangladesh, there are 50% of the agriculture labor force. This is according to FAO. And it was a study from 2016. Now, women constitute 50% of the farm labor force in Bangladesh. Much higher participation, I think, as far as the studies show from India and Pakistan, but I'm sure Sucharita and others here will be better placed to say this. And they belong to small and marginal farm households. They're often left out from getting benefits of agricultural extension services and credit. And since they don't get the benefits, they're not on anybody's list. They're not seen as a contributor, and it's more visible when it comes to men. And I would also attribute that this is unpaid labor. A lot of the work that women do as a part of the family labor is all unpaid, and they are contributing to the agriculture, but this is not recorded or paid for. The other reason being, and I think this other panelists may agree, that because women don't own land, and their contributions are also not recognizing that the title holder, the landowner, is given, even if it's a farmer with a small piece, the homestead, it's still the men. So there is that arrangement. And when we started looking to try and bring out these issues about how women farmers are being treated differently, or whether policies don't exist, we took on projects for over 5 years. These came within the framework of our development projects because we wanted to work with communities and women to graduate out of poverty. And they also recognize how they're contributing to the food security, they're contributing to the agriculture. And one of our projects was particularly looking at women in agriculture and their empowerments, and we worked there for 5 years. Another project was making market work for women, because there's a strong link between the two. Now, this 5 years simultaneous projects taught us a lot of things, as some of what I'm sharing with you here, that, when we want women to be in decision making, participate, graduate from poverty, this agriculture and the way it is organized, the way the practices are happening, the way the services are provided, it's not gender sensitive, and it's still suffering. I mean, I went to the agriculture minister saying, please give the women the agriculture card. And she said, no, we do have a system. We have the practice, and it'll be given in the name of the man, the land ownership and all this. And if the card is given to the man or the son, a male member, then the women have difficulty accessing some of the agriculture services and so on. So this is where, as a part of the development initiatives, we took on the advocacy and lobbying. The other learning from these projects was that women, it was very clear, we have done time diary, we have documented that they spend 6-7 hours more than men in unpaid care work, in care work, basically, along with all that they're doing in the for poultry or agriculture or post-harvest pieces. They have additional 6 hours of work. So can you imagine how much? So this needed to be redistributed. And we, from the development side, felt that we need to create platforms and spaces where the women themselves can do advocacy and lobbying. And this led us to go all the way to the parliamentarians, to the parliament, to the speaker, and to give them their referendum agenda they asked. And one of them was very strongly about arrangements to support them in terms of providing daycare and so on, and also redistributing and awareness raising. On the market side, it was about making market gender sensitive. The patriarchy and the practices were already there for women to access, made it difficult for women to access. So we did a lot of lobbying, and now in our working areas, there is space for women to use as markets. There are toilets, there are breastfeeding centers, daycare centers, and this has changed the dynamics for women. But then there's still the patriarchy there, the negotiation skills. So we help and work with them in that area. So I would say that when we are looking at the studies, we are all looking at situations post pre-corona. But the last 2 years has thrown a lot of things out of any proportion, out of any evaluation. Unfortunately, it is the agriculture in Bangladesh which helped us from people returned to the rural areas and they didn't go hungry. The food situation was not as dire as it could have been, and there was this place for the community, the informal workers to go to, and that was where the rural areas and the agriculture production and the contributions of all, I mean, men, women, but we have to remember that that has helped us. But in terms of all the other factors that have kicked in because of Corona, we need to really review and think of policies, not as if we were thinking in pre-Corona situation. We'll also have to be sensitive enough because this has changed the dynamics. I leave it at there. I'm happy to take questions and go on from there.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you for joining. I am sorry that I have blown up the time a bit. So, Tamara, do you think I can get 5 minutes for some quick questions?
Yes,
I'm with you, Kuhu. I'm with you, Kuhu. Don't worry, I'll stay for the whole session. Thank you.
Yeah. Take your time, Kuhu.
So, I think first I would ask the reviewers to ask questions and then open it up for the audience. Will that be okay?
Yep. I don't know where my reviewer is. Christian, have you got a question?
I'm watching you and listening.
Oh, okay. Look, I really want to thank the panel, but I also want to commend more broadly the way that this program has tried to grapple with issues of gender and the consideration of gender. I mean, if I was going to make a comment in the earlier panels, I wanted to ask, where's the gender dimension? What I really enjoyed in this one is how you've each taken a different angle. Just got to really, I guess I step back from all of this and think about those things that shift the position of women as opposed to those things that might shift the position, so the condition and then the position of women. And just something you said, Emma, I thought was really, it just triggered a thought. And I mean, this is to any of the panel, but, those CASI techniques are feasible and reasonable as long as they don't challenge the norms and don't undermine the status quo. And so what we see is potentially women gaining conditions, so maybe more time, more money, but more broadly, just the position of women and their status and their agency to make decisions change. And if I just step up, I guess there's an inequity across the system anyway between landholders and non-landholders. And Farah, you pointed to that very clearly. And so is nudging the role and contribution of women in smallholder farming the answer for women? Or should we be thinking more broadly about off-farm opportunities when we think about empowerment and shifting their position? So, I mean, it might just be too big a spanner in the works at this point in time, but it just really, your comments, Emma, I was really appreciative of that reflection. And certainly I know reading your work, Sucharita, that you talked to that issue of what's changed and not changed in terms of women's condition. And that maybe in Bangladesh, there's been some more gains than either in Nepal or in India.
I'll just a few seconds to respond to you.
Mm.
I think these are deeply rooted social structures.
Yeah.
And apart from doing incremental nudging, I don't think we are going to have a revolutionary change in the system until really a revolution takes place. So that's why the incremental nudging, persuading techniques to change are happening.
Yeah.
So I will let, would Sucharita want to respond?
Oh, well, the only thing I would like to bring in, I think it's important what Kate was pointing towards. And I think it is extremely important to think of, as Kuhu mentioned, that it is very deeply socially rooted, the intersectionality aspect, which Kate was talking about, the small farmers, I mean, women from the small farmers, I think that is important, but at the same time, the caste angle and the other cultural context, that intersectionality often goes missing. It was missing from our study, for example. I mean, the nature of the study did not allow for it. But I think to be able to understand which direction we move towards, nudging might work, and I feel that to some extent, and I think demonstration within a village of a particular kind of, again, looking at the intersectional identity. So I was very struck in one of the ACIR meetings or workshops where, this came up, what came up was this, a woman driving tractor, a Muslim woman driving tractor. Now, tractors culturally, plowing is not done by women in India. So I'm saying something. So this is intersectional because it's a woman and a Muslim woman driving a tractor. This could have a kind of a, the nudging effect doesn't come from the government in this case, but this might actually make some difference. But I agree with Kuhu that it'll probably be only an incremental change, but it could be important to start with. Yeah, that's all.
Can I say, Kuhu?
Yeah, please.
So, thank you very much. It was a very interesting session and very new insights were raised. And you rightly mentioned that we have to correct the social structure, but I don't know how many years it will take to change the social structure. But what I feel that as it was mentioned that the credit is not being given to women, or the cards are not being given to women, it is given to the men. I think that it is neither given to men nor women. It is given to the landowner. So landowner is getting credit and the card. So it has nothing to do with the gender. So what should we do? I think our policies should be to give incentives. If we can have joint ownership, traditionally it is the men who is getting the ownership. So can we transform from single ownership or male dominated ownership to a joint kind of ownership? This is one area. And if we give incentives to transform this way, I think then women will be empowered to have their say in the land also. The second is, like government policies, opening of Jan Dhan account. Any can open the Jan Dhan account without any cash deposit. So if we have some sort of different kinds of policies, we may engage women in these kinds of transformation. This is just a suggestion for your consideration.
Thank you, PK. And I'm afraid I can't take any more questions, and thank you very much to the panelists, because we have to move on to the next. And you can put your questions on the chat box and we'll keep a record of it and respond to you individually. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kuhu.
And now with that, I would hand over to Tamara